Eagles back at practice today. Another injury at camp. We'll get the latest on that. John McMullen from 97.3 ESPN.com. In just a moment, the Eagles hit the road for the second straight week, taking on the Indianapolis Colts at Lucas Oil Stadium. It's the fifth preseason meeting between the Colts and the Eagles. Eagles are 3-1 in those games. Last time these two teams played in the preseason, last year, Eagles 36-10. Victory there, not that it really matters. We'll get the latest news and notes as we do every day at this time. From 97.3 ESPN.com, Eagles Insider, John McMullen. You can read him nationally at todayspigskin.com, on Twitter at JF McMullen. John, a lot of stories again today at camp, I guess highlighted by the pseudo-starting left guard is out, and that's bad news for him. I know Wentz getting hurt had people frustrated, but Seumalo is a guy who was behind to begin with. Is this going to be a situation where he'll miss the game and then possibly lose a starting left guard spot here because of this?
Yeah, I think it's a possibility. He hasn't played well to begin with, so I think the Eagles were trying to throw him into the deep end of the pool and see if he swam a little bit. And he hasn't played well, played a little bit better from week 1 to week 2 in the preseason, but certainly didn't look like a starting left guard in this league. And Stefan Wisniewski has played very well. As when Brandon Brooks was down and injured, he's now taken some snaps as the backup center. And the Eagles kind of knew what they had with Wisniewski and the fact he's a veteran guy. He understands how to play. And I don't think anybody can look at those two guys right now, Wisniewski and Seumalo, and say Seumalo is the better player. He does have the bigger upside, though. And if you go way back to the draft, Mike, I mentioned this, and I still believe this. If you think about how things went on draft day, because the Eagles obviously traded up twice to get Carson Wentz, they didn't have a second-round pick, and their plan is obviously to put Carson Wentz in the bubble wrap for the season. So I always thought this team would do everything humanly possible to get Seumalo out there as the starting left guard, just to say they got something out of this draft immediately, and I think that's kind of played out. But when Doug sits down before week 1 and says, hey, I got to win football games, I think he's going to pick the best player, and I think the best player right now is Wisniewski.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think a lot of people have kind of echoed your statements there, which makes it a little odd that with Lane Johnson going out that they wouldn't try to put the veteran guy in there to stabilize things for a little while. I mean, so can Wisniewski, in essence, win a starting job by playing well Saturday night?
Yeah, I think he can, and I think he was always in the mix. I think the plan was, hey, we know what we have in Wisniewski. Let's see what we have in Seumalo. So I think that was how the Eagles were approaching it, and sort of look at him in week 1, week 2, week 3 of the preseason, and then decide, hey, if he's not ready, we'll just put Wisniewski in there, and he'll be able to handle it. He's not going to be overwhelmed by the stage or anything of that nature. So I think that was the plan, and now he's got an opportunity. I think if he plays well, he is going to be the starting left guard because, as we said, Seumalo, while he improved from week 1 to week 2, he still wasn't there yet, and now having a setback with the strained pec, that's going to affect him. And when young players don't get repetitions, it affects them more than obviously veteran players who know how to play in this league.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter here as we look at today's practice, some things as they get ready for Saturday night. And Isaac Seumalo, that's the really what is the extent of the injury? How long do they anticipate him being out for? What's it, just a strained pec, not anything torn, surgery or anything like that, right?
No, they called it a strained pec. I can only assume they played down the injury, so it shouldn't be that long. Brandon Brooks had a similar injury. Remember when he came out in week 1 of the preseason, we were concerned just because when you hear that, you hear pec, and you automatically think of a torn pec, and that's a likely season-ending injury. But Brooks was back relatively quickly, and I think Seumalo is going to be back relatively quickly as long as they're not lying to us. Remember, in the NFL, you don't have to put out injury reports during the preseason. You only have to do that during the regular season. So it's a little more difficult to discern the true information. But so far, Doug's been pretty upfront. He was upfront with Brooks, and they certainly didn't seem concerned with the Seumalo injury.
Real quick, while you brought up the injury report thing, I know you, covering the league nationally, probably have a take as what the teams think about this new injury report. I know it's going to mess with the gamblers and the fantasy players.
Yeah, I think the teams love it. I think it's not good for the dispersal of information. It gets you a little bit closer, and I think the NFL, I wrote about it on today's pigskin.com earlier this week, is it gets the NFL closer to the NHL, where if you think about how they provide injury information, lower body injury, upper body injury, they don't really give you concrete details. And if you think about the injury reports dating back to when they started, it really had to do, as you mentioned, with gambling more than anything else. And it was to get information out there to the public. So by doing that, you discourage sort of insider information, which can lead to corruption and things like that. Now, there's two sides of that coin as far as the NFL. The NFL never admits that gambling has a big impact on their games. It's kind of ludicrous because the Las Vegas lines you see on every newspaper and every website, they're not for entertainment purposes only. A lot of the popularity of this game is due to gambling, and this is going to affect how people get their information, because it's going to be easier for coaches like Bill Belichick to put guys in that questionable category, and then you're not going to be sure unless you're at practice and see how they're moving and how they're going and how they're capable. Because basically, if you were listed as probable, that was, I think the number was 95% of the guys who were listed as probable played last year. So that is information, and it's valuable information.
No doubt about it. If you have a guy now who's listed as questionable, which comes out statistically, around that 50-50 mark, now you're not sure what is going to happen. You got guys like Tom Brady, certain of these high-profile guys. It's almost like teams put them on the injury report just to kind of stick it to the league a little bit, Yeah,
well, the Patriots certainly do that. At one point, they had, I think, an injury report a couple of years ago with 20-something people on it. So, Belichick, he got in trouble for that at one point, so he went overboard. But now the assumption by the league, as usual, this league's not very proactive, and they never think about the unintended consequences of their decisions. And their assumption is everybody will just do what they're supposed to do. And if you're not 50-50, as you mentioned, they're not going to put you on the injury report. And I don't believe that. I think coaches around this league are looking for every competitive advantage they can possibly get, and they're going to play games with that injury report like they play games in every other aspect of the game.
John, you wrote about Jaylen Watkins today at 97.3 ESPN.com. Everybody out there, if you haven't read the article, definitely worth a read, because something stuck out to me, and I know it's preseason, but Jaylen Watkins, according to Pro Football Focus, has been the best safety so far in these exhibition games.
Yeah, he has, and it is what it is. It's not important that the big-time safeties obviously aren't playing a lot of snaps, and they're not in the mix. So the Harrison Smiths of the world, the Malcolm Jenkins on this team, they're not in the mix for that. But it does say of the second-tier safeties that he's playing very well, and I think that's true. He has been playing very well, and he's ascended up the depth chart. He started way back in the off season on the third team, and he slowly has worked his way up. He was on the second team with Ed Reynolds, and if you remember earlier in training camp when Malcolm went down with the the minor hamstring injury, it was Ed Reynolds who got the first opportunity to sort of mix in with Rodney McLeod with the first team. And then on the second day, it was Jaylen Watkins. They rotated each of them, gave each of them a chance. And Watkins never lost that job. He's been the third safety ever since. And if the Eagles need to go to a third safety, it's going to be Jaylen Watkins.
So right now, he's the first guy off the bench. Does that mean, though, that we feel confident that if a guy got hurt, that he's ready to be a starting level player?
Well, he is. I think he is coverage-wise, and obviously his history dating back to Florida in college was the fact that he played mainly cornerback. He played both positions, but he was mainly a corner. He was drafted here as a corner, and everyone assumed he could turn into sort of a nickelback in this league. So he's got good coverage skills. The question is, when you move guys back, similar to Walter Thurman when the Eagles did it last season, can they handle the part of the job in run support? And so far, he's been doing a good job. He's really improved at it. Jim Schwartz talked about it yesterday, about how he keeps getting better and better. He understands that's the aspect of his game he has to work on most, and he's been doing a good job to this point. And I think it's only going to improve. The one thing when I talked to Jaylen yesterday, the one thing he always wanted to play corner. So I think a little disappointed at first when he was moved back to safety, but now he's enjoying it. He understands that's going to be his position long term, and he's starting to embrace the role.
Yeah, we're talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Covers the Eagles. Of course, the Eagles and the Colts this weekend, and then the first team offense will get elongated play. I found some of the things that Frank Reich said, especially yesterday, where he mentioned, Darren Sproles. It almost seems that the Eagles are so disenchanted by the wide receiver play that they might come to the realization that they got to play Sproles more in like a slot role.
Yeah, I don't know if they're going to play him in a slot role because there's just limitations to him because of his body type. I mean, it's very, very difficult to have a 5'6" guy out playing receiver, at least consistently. But the whole thing with Darren Sproles, and I think that's what Frank was trying to get across, I think the one reporter asked was talking about Danny Woodhead, and Frank said, hey, Darren Sproles is the original. Forget about Danny Woodhead. He's the guy who started everything in San Diego as far as catching the ball out of the backfield. And he's the one guy on the Eagles that opposing defensive coordinators are going to put a 43 jersey on during scout team work and try to match up with. I mean, that's how difficult he is because safeties can't deal with him, linebackers can't deal with him. Corners can't deal with him because he's too powerful as a runner. So he's a very interesting and unique player that you can move around to a number of different positions. The problem is also he's 33 years old. He is undersized, and you have to limit his touches if you want him to be successful for 16 weeks. But I think nobody understands that better than Frank Reich, and I think he's going to use them correctly. And that means moving him all over the place. He's going to be in the backfield. He's going to be in the slot. He's going to run an occasional end around. They're going to use him in many, many different ways, and that's because he is their best player with the football in his hand.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is this: we know he's getting older. He's small. A lot of the fans want to see more of him, but it's just not a smart move for them to give him a lot of touches. Ryan Mathews has been quiet, and I didn't put two and two together when they brought Reich here. Those two have a little history together. Was he the coordinator at all with Mathews in San Diego?
Yeah, he was there. I think he was a quarterbacks coach first when Ryan left. But, yeah, they have a history together. And everybody knows Ryan Mathews is the issue with him, and he's got a ton of talent. And if he's on the football field, he's going to produce. So I think the Eagles' mentality is they're going to go in the direction of some other backs who have bigger reputations. If you look around this league, Adrian Peterson never plays in the preseason. And big-time, top-tier running backs, you're not going to waste them in the preseason. If you remember that first game, Ryan Mathews was in there for 3 snaps with the rest of the offense, played sparingly, and he's going to play a lot like the entire first team, but that's it. And then they're going to shut him down. Their whole mentality is Ryan Mathews, top running back on this team. There's no question about it. It's not close. He's got to be the bell cow, and the point of this organization has to get him ready, but they have to get him healthy, have to keep him healthy for week 1 and try to keep him on the field as much as possible, because they're a significantly better offense when he's on the field.
There's no question. But I guess the point of me asking that is he understands the fragile nature of Mathews, meaning that he's not going to try to run this guy into the ground because he has a good understanding that he does, in fact, have injury issues.
Yeah, everybody who was in that San Diego organization obviously understands that. The problem is he's such an interesting, really, you have to look at him as almost a research piece, because he's a big back. He's tremendously physical the way he runs, and that's not going to change. So at some point, you say to yourself, there's not much you can do. When somebody's going to run that hard and run that physically at the position of running back, you're going to get hit, and you're going to take some hits. And a lot of times the injuries are just bad luck, and a lot of times if it's a hamstring or a quad or a tweak here and there, you start to question things maybe a little bit. But I think the Eagles know, hey, there's not much they can do. You can't legislate injuries, and they got to make sure that Ryan Mathews is their top running back for as long as they can. And when he's healthy, they're going to give him the football. There's just not much else you can do.
Yeah, and with this, this offense is so – it seems that there's just question marks all over the place, from wide receiver to the line to obviously the quarterback. You don't know what – people have their opinions of Sam, but, he's somewhere in the middle right now. Can he elevate himself from the middle to the next level, or is he going to be in the middle, or is he going to take a step back because there's not a lot of weapons around him here? I think it's a very fluid situation on that offensive side of the ball. And you've been there, since July. Have you seen a guy on offense stand out? I mean, even a tight end?
No, not really. Tight ends in general don't tend to stand out in that type of environment. I think Zach Ertz is going to be a very good player as a pass-catching tight end, but he's not going to have that wow factor that a big-time receiver and even a running back in the training camp environment, because you don't have the pads on all that much. And even though the Eagles have had them on far more than they used to under Chip Kelly, it's still not a lot. So you don't get a real opportunity to see somebody who's as physical as Mathews really, really do it in practice consistently. You have to wait for the games. That's just the environment of today's NFL. When you talk about Sam and having a big season, it's going to be tough for him because there's just not explosive players on this offense. And I think Doug understands that. I think he realizes that. And this entire team is trying to win football games a different way this year. And they're going to try to win them with defense in a running game and sort of milking the clock and going in a completely opposite direction and trying to win 20 to 14 games instead of 34-30. So this is going to be a different Eagles team.
Well, and maybe that'll be better for them, that they're a defensive-minded team. And one thing I liked about what I saw in the brief time from Doug was, I saw times when they ran the ball and they had, 3 tight ends bunched on a side. They've used the guard in the backfield as kind of a tight as a fullback there. At least they've gotten creative knowing some of their limitations.
Yeah, formationally, I said that early on. This is calculus compared to arithmetic, because the tempo took the formations out of the offense with Chip Kelly. So you basically saw the same formations again and again and again. And now you have the traditional Bill Walsh-like West Coast playbook, which is 300 pages long and has formations out the yin-yang. So it depends, what flavor do you like? Both sides can work if you execute them and do them properly. But this is a complete shift from this organization in so many ways, and that includes formationally on offense. You're going to see a lot of formations, and one of the positives of this team throughout training camp, I thought you were going to see a ton of problems just lining up, pre-snap penalties, because this team spent 3 years not even varying their snap count. 3 years. So all of a sudden you have hard counts.
That's unbelievable.
Going on 3 instead of 2. Yeah. So and really they've been pretty clean to this point. So I think that's a positive.
Believe me. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but I think having Schwartz as a former head coach, and it almost seems that Peterson has taken a step back and allowed Schwartz, and we talked about this before you came on, John, that Peterson has to be careful that Schwartz's personality and likability from some of these players doesn't overshadow him as the head coach.
Yeah, I mean, Jim's got a very powerful personality, and I think he's gone out of his way to defer to Doug in some of his press conferences. And if somebody asks the question that goes too far, he'll say, hey, that's the head coach's job. Ask Doug. Even yesterday, somebody asked him about Dorial Green-Beckham. He said, look, ask Frank about that, Frank Reich, who was also going to talk after him. So he's been very good about that. And, hey, anytime you have somebody with his resume and you're a first-year coach, I think I look at it a different way. I think it shows confidence in yourself because, hey, a lot of first-year coach would be looking over their shoulder and say, I don't want a veteran guy who's been a head coach in this league, who's been so well respected, and by the way, his side of the football has more talent than my side of the football. A lot of people wouldn't want that hire, and they'd bring in a linebackers coach that wasn't well known, and give them a promotion, or a secondary coach. Doug got the best guy, so I think in a lot of ways that's a check mark in his column.
He's John McMullen. For more, check out 973ESPN.com. He's got a piece on Jaylen Watkins and also the injury to Isaac Seumalo up right now at 973ESPN.com. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen for more from Eagles. They're not at camp technically anymore, but they're still practicing in preparation for the start of the season, and all of his National Football League coverage at todayspigskin.com. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, Mike.